It was the kind of line you keep for comfort, a metaphor that turned her steadiness into something luminous. Laura moved through our apartment like someone who trusted the world could be soothed with coffee, patched mittens, and an apology that arrived at the right volume. 10, 12 years in, I took for granted the shape of her hands when she folded laundry, the way she hummed tunelessly as she kneaded dough, the warmth in the voice she used reading to our son at night. So when the little black pouch slid against my fingertips, the world tipped. It was a small velvet pouch tucked behind an organizer in her bag, the sort of thing that might hold rings, prayer beads, or a stray coin from a trip. I hadn't been looking for it. The day had collapsed on itself. A canceled conference, an empty afternoon. I told myself I was only straightening the hall when my hand eased the zipper. Inside was a key and a strip of photos. The key had 14B stamped into the head. The photos showed Laura with other people, an earnest woman with a diplomat's smile, Kyle, a wiry organizer whose laugh I'd heard in our hallway once, and a man with a generous jaw I didn't recognize at first, his cufflinks a little too polished for the rest of the photos. The man had his arm around Laura in one photo. Another showed him kissing her temple. Beneath the photos was a small digital recorder blinking a red sleep light, a heartbeat in my palm. I pressed play with a guilt I could taste. The recording rattled through operational talk. Names, pickups, a whisper of for the children. But then, late in the file, after the tactical talk dwindled, I heard two voices in a private rhythm not meant for a mission. Laura's voice softened. The other voice, handsome, silky, and far too intimate for work talk, laughed. I sat on the kitchen tile and tried to breathe. Marriage had always been an unspoken map of private territories. I'd kept my side. But a key marked 14B and pictures of my wife in another man's arms rearranged everything. I wanted to step back from suspicion, but curiosity is cowardice wearing a mask of courage. The next morning I used the key. Apartment 14B belonged to a block on the far side of town by the river, where the air mixed diesel and bakery warmth. Inside, it looked like a safe house. Bunk beds folded into chairs, a sewing machine under a sheet, a corkboard stuffed with maps and red pins. There were journals with lists of names and emergency contacts, the meticulous record-keeping that once made me proud of her discipline. There were photographs of kids, small faces with wide eyes, and donation receipts that matched the anonymous funds Laura had told me about when she talked about community work. But there, on a small table under a lamp, lay a thick envelope addressed to Laura from Mark Hale. The handwriting was careful. The paper felt expensive. A silk scarf and a hotel receipt for Suite 602 were nearby. The scent of cologne lingered like a footprint. I shouldn't have read the letter, but I did. It was flattering, then solicitous. Promises to push paperwork, offers of discreet donations, a line about dinners when the city is quiet. It referenced resources and favors. A man in power trying to grease a system that privately he described as stubbornly slow. My world narrowed into evidence. Photos, a letter, hidden recordings, the sting of discovery. The Laura I loved, volunteer, listener, the woman who came home smelling of coffee and yeast, had been meeting Mark Hale, a man who wielded resources and influence. Somewhere between safe houses and municipal offices, she had begun to accept the help of a donor whose money moved doors faster than patience did. When I called her that night and asked, she was short, then soft. Her voice could be the tide and the shore. She didn't deny the relationship, and denial would have been a brittle fix. but she explained it within the math of urgency. Mark had offered speed and the promise of paperwork done overnight. He had kissed her because he was human. She had allowed herself to be kissed because sometimes comfort arrives in the wrong package. We broke in the way marriages do, with accusations looping back into more accusations, with old resentments dug up and new stones added for weight. You didn't tell me, I said, the simplest indictment. You didn't think the light you carry would cast a shadow on us, she answered, with a look that made my anger curdle into something blacker. The betrayal stung more than a lover's infidelity because it changed the risk equation. Mark's involvement meant a man with leverage and maybe a streak of self-interest, had threads into structures that could crush the network Laura and her colleagues had built. If he wanted, he could ask questions the wrong way, hold back favors as penalties, or worse, use ties to official channels to expose safe houses. My jealousy and my fear braided into a desperate clarity. I loved her, and I feared for the children she protected. For weeks I folded inside myself and tried to be ordinary. I watched her, detective, lover, judge, and every tenderness felt like an accusation to me and a betrayal to her. I resented the way she hummed while washing dishes, resented how our son fell asleep to the cadence of her voice. Her apologies came like modest rain. Her explanations were thick with moral fog. Mark had opened a line of credit when banks were balking. He had expedited a medical visa for a boy who needed it. He had also asked her to attend dinners alone, be photographed with him at cultural events, accept an award backstage. He had told her he loved her. She had, in a raw moment when the world had worn her thin, given back an affection that had been seeking shelter. I wanted to punish him. I wanted to make the man feel what it was to be on the wrong end of consequence. But I couldn't, in good conscience, use the network that had saved lives as a weapon. I couldn't destroy a man whose money had sometimes paid for a child's heart procedure. My revenge had to be clever. It had to wound without breaking the things I still wanted to protect. So I waited, like a man waiting for a storm to throw a stray lightning bolt. I watched for error. Error arrived in the form of arrogance. Mark Hale, after tasting the thrill of power lubricated by favors, began to overreach. He wanted visibility. He grew impatient with Laura's discretion. When she refused to let him publicly anchor a project, which would have required naming donors and exposing channels, he got sharp. He asked Laura to bring kids to events so his charity could be photographed. He kept some paperwork for safekeeping and promised he'd take care of it. That was his mistake. One evening, at a small reception at Mark's townhouse, I followed a trail of detail that had started at 14B. I told myself I wouldn't go, but I went. I sat against a column, a ghost in a room of opal lights and thin laughter, and watched him move with the practiced ease of a man who believed he could buy decency. He smiled at Laura like a man who thought his gift had bought her consent. Kyle, wiry, impatient, borderline feral with a laugh that always sounded like an apology, slipped a note under 14B. He showed receipts I don't recognize. He wants control. It arrived like a dare. Kyle hated power disguised as charity. He'd seen how one donor could eclipse a whole network with money and whims. In the buzz of clinking silver, I watched a private exchange between Mark and Laura. She looked tired. He looked like a man expecting worship. He wrapped an arm around her and kissed her in a way that the photos had made tender, but that, Liv, looked like him claiming a possession. Heat ran through me. I also felt the ugly arithmetic of power. If Mark publicly attached himself to the movement, he could steer it. If he turned patronage into spectacle, it could become a theater that the kids could not survive on. So revenge took shape. I didn't lash out that night. I let the moment be seen. I photographed them. A kiss, then a handshake where Mark's fingers lingered too long on Laura's. I used the same camera Kyle had used to document rescues. The camera that had witnessed midnight crossings and silent van rides. Those images became seeds. The next day, I built a plan that was small, precise, surgical. Create an evidentiary trail of Mark's double life using only public, legally obtained materials. I asked Kyle to help. We collected receipts Mark had left at 14B and matched them to public contracts he'd claimed in civic reports. We found discrepancies, companies that did not exist, invoices for services never performed, transfers to shell accounts. We did not touch the ledger that contained safe addresses. We did not, under any circumstances, expose a child. We threaded our revenge through the thing men like Mark used most, appetite for prestige. It was a slow-burning fire. We compiled the packet and delivered it to a journalist known for exposing corrupt elites. The reporter liked documents and public theater. He wouldn't print anything that put a child at risk, but he could print evidence of civic abuse and financial malfeasance. He took the story with appropriate reservations. We supplied corroboration. When the piece ran, it didn't mention safe houses or children. It ran as an investigation. Donations routed through shadow accounts. Favors traded for visibility. Evidence that Mark had used humanitarian work to launder influence into cultural capitals. The city, proud of its philanthropic elite, suddenly felt embarrassed. Mark was asked to step down from boards and to answer for his donations. His smiling photograph, once on glossy spreads, ran next to headlines about misappropriated funds and conflicts of interest. The blow to him was loud and public. Our household's reaction was quieter and complicated. Laura felt both humiliated and a little vindicated. Mark's fall didn't erase her betrayal or my hurt. It did remove a dangerous lever. Without Mark's public sheen, the network regained a measure of safety. He could no longer weaponize visibility into surveillance. We did not reconcile like nothing had happened. The betrayal had shifted our geometry. I had taken revenge, exposing corruption that threatened many. But vengeance rarely stitches the torn parts. There were nights of silence when we pretended the grief had never existed. There were emails I found and never opened. There were also small gestures heavy with meaning. A post-it on the fridge, bought milk, interlooping script that made me smile like someone newly landed. Laura's contrition was uneven. She insisted the affair wasn't about love, but about exhaustion, a hunger for someone who could shift bureaucratic mountains with a phone call. She said she had pleaded with Mark to keep the children safe. He had made promises and broken them. She told me, sometimes angrily, that she never wanted to be photographed as his lover, but had let herself be visible because sometimes visibility opened doors for the people she was trying to help. I made mistakes, she told me. I wanted effectiveness faster than the world allowed. For me, revenge was not the climax, but a defensive carapace. The city had been forced to inspect itself. Mark's influence cratered. Investigations turned some of his donations into evidence. The state, embarrassed, started allocating funds to independent oversight instead of private, opaque channels. Our small victory was a bandage. It stopped a hemorrhage without pretending to heal everything. We tried to rebuild. My love for Laura didn't evaporate. It reconfigured. We learned to argue without immediate rancor, asked for facts instead of insinuations. We set conditions for what work she would accept publicly. No more single donor control. We instituted transparency across the network. No lone donor could make unilateral choices. It was pragmatic, and it felt like a small justice. But human revenge is rarely only about the outside world. I had my private reckoning. The man I had been. The one who would have silently foregone an indiscretion for domestic peace had become someone who demanded dignity. I wanted Laura to feel consequence as a teacher. I wanted her to see the damage an affair could do when the temptations of influence seep into a life given to service. So the final act of revenge was domestic. I filed for separation and then divorce. I did it not in a fit, but like someone canceling a business contract. I wanted the end to be regulated and legal. I wanted agency and to control the narrative. I didn't seek vindictiveness in court papers. I sought fairness, custody measures to shield our son from spectacle, and a financial settlement that would let both of us pursue lives not shadowed by each other's mistakes. Divorce was quiet revenge. No spectacle, but it restored agency. Laura was forced to confront that she had betrayed not just me, but herself. The damage an affair can inflict when power and intimacy blur. She lost the easy domestic intimacy she had taken for granted. I lost a partner and gained a different freedom. Our son, resilient and kind, navigated this new geography with mature patience. Months later, life was quieter. We maintained a practical co-parenting that was efficient and, grudgingly, cooperative. We kept the network safe via the transparency we instituted. Laura publicly acknowledged her role in allowing too much influence to concentrate in one donor. She issued a statement that was accountable, not theatrical. She continued the work she believed in, but with boundaries painfully learned. There were nights I missed the hum of coffee in the kitchen, the way she tied a dish towel around her waist and sang off-key. There were nights she sat across me at a school play with tired eyes, and I thought of the cost of our choices. There was consolation, too. The children we had helped grew up. We received postcards and photos. One day, a young man I had once carried in a van arrived at our apartment with his wife and child. He thanked me without knowing that one reason his life had been preserved was the argument that had come later, the revenge that protected the movement. Time softened edges. Laura and I never remarried each other. We formed careful friendships that didn't demand intimacy beyond what we could offer. We learned the dangerous art of compartmentalizing. Love that was fierce and imperfect, work that demanded secrecy and transparency in equal measure, and civic life that required oversight alongside courage. My revenge had been a mirror and a blade. It showed who we had been while cutting away what had become toxic. It was not heroic in any classical sense. It insisted on consequence, a quiet legal separation, a public exposure of corruption, and enforced integrity for the movement that had become our orbit. It hurt both of us, but in the arithmetic of the city, it saved more than it destroyed. Years later, on a spring morning with the river pearled in gulls, I found that old black pouch in a bottom drawer. The key was dull. The photos had browned at the edges. I held them and did not feel fury. There was sorrow, almost gratitude, for the children we had kept safe, for the messy humanity that propelled someone to both brave rescue and human error, and for the honest cost of trying to do good in an unjust world. Laura visited sometimes. Our son grew into someone steady and kind. We spoke as people do after a wound has scarred, with gentleness and the memory of pain. She still volunteered. She still hummed. She had learned boundaries. And perhaps more importantly, to live with the knowledge that love and mistakes can coexist without erasing the possibility of good. I had thought she was an angel. What I found was a person, luminous and flawed, a woman who saved children and also made terrible choices. I forgave her in the way that matters, not by erasing the ledger, but by refusing to let anger be the final line. I let the city and the law take care of Mark's fate. I took my revenge and, in the same motion, carved a future out of the pieces.